Let me read to you a passage from the 18th chapter of St. Matthew's Gospel, verses 1 to 5, verse 10 and verses 12 to 14. It's the Gospel for Tuesday after the 19th Sunday in Ordinary Time. St. Matthew writes, "At that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?' He called a little child and had him stand among them. And he said, 'I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. See that you do not look down on one of these little ones, for I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. What do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep, and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills, and go to look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, I tell you the truth, he is happier about that one than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should be lost." That's from Matthew chapter 18, verse 1 to 5, verse 10 and verse 12 to 14. Our Lord speaks there of humility. Humility stands out among many instances of natural virtue, even without reference to God and his revelation. Very many would regard a due humility as a positive natural virtue. A gifted person who flaunts his gifts and who manifestly regards himself highly is positively unattractive, and most gifted persons understand this. They may not be humble within themselves, perhaps, but they will, as a point of ordinary strategy, present themselves humbly. A champion runner will be delighted in his victory, but when interviewed by the press, will perhaps say that he is humbled to receive the prize and the adulation. So will the victor in political elections. He has been humbled by the confidence people placed in him. It is perceived as important to present a persona of due humility. If it is seen that humility is a genuine characteristic of an accomplished person, this evokes admiration. It is also understood that pride is a natural temptation, which, if succumbed to, will deform a person. It is also broadly understood that one can counter the temptation to pride and become more humble by an active practice of it, by, say, recognizing the attainments of others generously and actively maintaining a lower estimate of one's own importance. We read in the first book of Maccabees that, and I quote, "Alexander the son of Philip the Macedonian, who came from the land of Kittim, advanced to the ends of the earth and plundered many nations. When the earth became quiet before him, he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up. After this he fell sick." First book of Maccabees, chapter 1, verse 1 to 5. So, the young Alexander the Great was proud. This was natural, given his gifts and accomplishments, but it was bad and tragic. What might have been the wonder of this man and his achievements had he maintained and developed a natural virtue of humility, not merely a persona, but the real thing? This is hard to imagine, precisely because pride seeks after and ordinarily follows upon honours, power, riches. And this is what Alexander sought and gained. In any case, it is evident to ordinary human reflection, quite apart from the declarations of divine revelation, that humility in some sense is a virtue. It is to be sought, for it is good for human life. Pride in some sense is a vice, and to be avoided, for it is bad for human life. Whether the great philosophers had a clear perception of this is perhaps another matter, but broadly, this has ordinarily been understood. Now, grace, the life of God coming to us in the person of Jesus Christ, builds on nature. What nature at its best can suggest is affirmed in a higher sense by God. What the best of human perception can divine is not directly contradicted by revelation. Rather, it is complemented, augmented, enriched, transformed, made new, and exalted to new heights. God has revealed that the humble man is indeed pleasing to him, and that pride is odious in his sight. The humble man will be exalted. This point is often repeated in the New Testament. The Magnificat prayer of Mary, the mother of Jesus, highlights this as a pattern of the Old Testament. He has scattered the proud of heart. He has put down the mighty from their thrones and exalted the lowly. Luke chapter 1, verse 51 to 52. Christ tells his parable of the Pharisee praying in the temple, with the publican behind him repeatedly asking pardon of God for his sins. He, the publican, who is despised by the Pharisee for his sins, goes home justified, while the Pharisee does not. Our Lord stated that he was humble of heart, thereby alerting us to this central feature of the humanity of the incarnate God and placing it before us for our imitation. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart. Matthew chapter 11, verse 28 to 30. All of this brings us to the gospel passage I read earlier from Matthew chapter 18, verse 1 to 5, verse 10, verse 12 to 14, in which our Lord warns his disciples that they must actively practice humility if they wish to enter the kingdom of heaven. The image he chooses to place before them is that of being like a little child. I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. St. Therese of Lisieux, Therese Martin, doctor of the Church, formulated her way to holiness of life in terms of this divinely employed image of the little child. It is her way of spiritual childhood, littleness before God and trusting abandonment to him. Treatises have been written on the all-important virtue of humility in the following of Jesus Christ, which is the essence of revealed religion. Bishop William Ullathorne of Birmingham in the 19th century wrote penetratingly on humility. Pope Leo XIII, when still Cardinal Joachim Pecci, Bishop of Perugia, wrote a masterly short treatise on the practice of humility. The point is that this basic virtue must be identified and practiced with the grace of God. Let us resolve to seek the grace of God to grow in this virtue which Christ sets before us in the gospel I read earlier. The Imitation of Christ, that book, proposes a prayer for us to obtain the grace of devotion and humility. Remember, O Lord, it says, that I am nothing, that I have nothing, and am worth nothing. You alone are good. You alone are just and holy. You can do all things. You give all things. You fill all things. You leave only the sinner empty. Remember your mercies and fill my heart with your grace. You who do not want your works to remain empty. Book 3, chapter 3. Let us strive for humility of soul.